They vanished like ghosts after hurting you. No apology, no explanation, just a deafening silence. Ever wondered how someone can cause pain and then act like nothing happened? You lie awake, replaying every word, every moment, while they seem to move on with ease. But here's the truth: they didn't forget. They just don't want to face who they really are. What if I told you that their silence isn't strength? It's not peace. It's fear camouflaged behind a fragile mask, their terrified will. Crack. They hurt you and walked away like it was nothing. No explanation, no remorse, just silence. You're left questioning everything. Did I mean anything to them? Do they even care? And here's the cold, hard truth: they do care, but not in the way you think. Their silence isn't peace. It's a cover-up, a fragile illusion they use to protect a reality they refuse to confront. Because if they ever truly acknowledged what they did, their entire identity, the one they've carefully constructed, would crumble behind that quiet facade. There's not calmness, there's chaos. And no, it's not love they're hiding. It's fear, it's shame. It's a frantic need to rewrite the story before you realize the truth. They never were who you thought they were. In this video, we're going to tear down that mask. We're going to expose what narcissists actually feel after they hurt you, but will never say out loud. And even more importantly, I'll show you how to emotionally detach and reclaim your power for good. Because when a narcissist hurts you and then walks away without a backward glance, most people assume they feel nothing, that they're cold, empty, emotionally dead inside. But that's not quite true. They do feel something, just not what a normal, emotionally developed person would feel. The narcissist isn't devoid of emotion there. Emotions are twisted, mutated. They don't experience guilt the way you do. They can't feel remorse in the traditional sense, because if they did, it would destroy the very image they built of themselves. To truly feel guilt, a person needs a solid inner self, someone capable of looking in the mirror and saying, "Yes, I hurt someone. I take responsibility." But a narcissist, their self is not rooted in truth. It's a house of mirrors, distorted by delusions of admiration, power, and control. Guilt would crack the glass. Remorse would reduce it to shards. So what do they feel instead? Shame, but not the kind that makes you grow. Not the kind that sparks change. This is toxic shame, corrosive, paralyzing. The kind they will do anything to escape. Deny it, project it, bury it under lies. Because facing it would mean admitting they're not perfect. And for a narcissist, that's unthinkable. It's not that they're unaware of the pain they caused. It's that they cannot afford to acknowledge it, not even privately. Inside them is a constant war, not between right and wrong, but between ego and reality. Between the illusion they show the world and the truth they're terrified to face. In their quiet moments when no one is around, they may feel a flicker of guilt, a sting of regret, a moment of clarity, but they will never let it grow, because if they do, it threatens the one thing they value more than anything else: the illusion of who they think they are. Admitting they caused real pain would mean staring into a mirror they've spent their entire life avoiding. It would mean confronting the truth, and that truth threatens the very foundation of their psychological survival. So instead of facing it, they pivot fast. Discomfort quickly becomes blame. Guilt morphs into justification. They tell themselves things like, "You were too sensitive. You pushed me into it. I had no choice. It wasn't even that bad." This isn't emotional maturity. This is emotional self-defense, a carefully constructed psychological firewall designed to shield the ego from collapse. It's not that they feel nothing, it's that they can't afford to process it like a healthy mind would. So they redirect. And you need to understand this, especially if you're still carrying the weight of self-blame. The narcissist does feel the emotional aftermath, they just refuse to process it. Instead of owning it, they rewrite the story entirely in their version. They become the victim. They convince others or, worse, themselves, that you were unstable, that you overreacted, that they had to walk away to protect their peace. But this is not about truth, it's about control. What they're engaging in isn't reflection. It's psychological warfare crafted through narrative. And their most powerful weapon, silence. That silence isn't a sign of inner peace. It's not acceptance, it's strategy. A calculated move in a larger effort to avoid accountability and maintain control. Why should this matter to you? Because this is where your emotional intelligence comes into play, not theirs. You need to recognize that their refusal to apologize is not proof that you were unworthy. It's proof that they are emotionally limited. You are not weak because you're in pain. You are not foolish for wanting closure. These are signs of a healthy, empathetic human being. But if you keep searching for that closure from someone who sees responsibility as a personal attack, you will only deepen the wound. Let that sink in. Their silence is not harmless. It's not indifference. It's emotional armor. They're not free of feeling. They're full of fear. But don't be mistaken. Their fear isn't about losing you. It's about being forced to face themselves. So yes, narcissists feel something, but not empathy, not remorse, not love in the way you understand it. What they feel is shame, fear, a compulsive urge to dodge accountability at any cost. They crave the illusion of superiority, even if that illusion leaves a trail of destruction behind them. And if you don't see this clearly, you'll spend weeks, months, maybe years, trying to translate your pain into a language they will never speak. Don't do that to yourself. See the truth. Reclaim your perspective. Because the moment you stop trying to decode their silence, that's the moment your healing begins. Let's make one thing absolutely clear. Guilt is not weakness. In fact, when guilt is healthy, it's a sign of a well-functioning conscience. It means you have the emotional capacity to reflect on your impact, to own your mistakes, and to grow from them. Guilt leads to apology, to change, to redemption. But for a narcissist, guilt doesn't follow that same path. It's not because they never feel guilt at all, but because guilt is dangerous for them. It's like staring into a mirror that doesn't lie. A mirror that shows all the things they've fought to bury. The manipulation, the deception, the cowardice, the fear. And narcissists, they don't handle mirrors very well. The moment a narcissist feels exposed when someone gets too close to the truth behind their carefully constructed imager, warning siren goes off in their mind. It says, "This person is a threat to how I see myself. I must flip the script before they reveal my shame." And instead of stepping into guilt and owning their mistakes, they react swiftly, defensively, sometimes even aggressively. They justify, distort, or lash out because to admit they were wrong is to let the mask slip. And for a narcissist, letting the mask fall feels like psychological death. You need to see this clearly. Narcissists don't operate from a grounded, authentic sense of self. They function from a false self, a polished persona designed to appear strong, in control, admirable, untouchable. But underneath that image lies something much more fragile. This false self is not rooted in truth. It's built entirely on fear of being exposed, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being enough, and guilt. Guilt is like an earthquake. To that illusion, it shakes the very ground they walk on. Because to feel guilt is to admit, I did something wrong, and that contradicts who I claim to be. That contradiction creates unbearable psychological tension. So what do they do instead? They run, they lash out, or worse, they pretend nothing ever happened. And then they turn the blame on you. You're too emotional. You're overreacting. You just want drama. This is not accountability. This is emotional survival inside a broken system they created long ago. They'll do anything to avoid the mirror. So what happens to all that? Guilt they refuse to carry. They project it. Now you're the toxic one. They minimize it. It wasn't that serious. They deflect. Let's not dwell on the past. Or they vanish completely, giving you the silent treatment, as if disappearing erases responsibility. But no matter the tactic, the result is always the same. They never face the mirror, because if they did, they would have to confront the truth they've spent their entire life avoiding, that they hurt good people, not because they're powerful, but because they're terrified. This is the painful truth where many people get stuck. You keep hoping that maybe one day, they'll wake up and say, I finally see it. I'm sorry, but that day rarely comes. Not because it's impossible, but because it requires something they were never taught to embrace: humility. And for a narcissist, humility is not a virtue, it's a threat. You can't force someone to feel guilt. You can't teach self-awareness to someone still clinging to blame like a shield. That's not your burden. It never was. So what should you do? Stop waiting for the mirror to work on them. Turn it gently toward yourself. Not to blame yourself, but to see clearly. You are not weak for caring. You are not foolish for hoping. You simply loved someone who was never capable of emotional honesty and true strength. It's not in making them apologize. It's in realizing you don't need their apology to move forward. Narcissists don't process guilt like you do because their survival depends on avoiding the truth. But your healing, it doesn't depend on their guilt. It depends on your ability to stop chasing closure from someone who can't even face themselves. Let them keep running from the mirror. You face it. You grow, you rise. A narcissist doesn't disappear after hurting you because they're heartless. They vanish because they're terrified. Terrified not of you, but of what you've seen. Because when a narcissist causes harm, whether they intend to or not, they expose the truth behind their carefully curated mask. That mask of charm, confidence, and superiority. It's not real, it's armor. And behind it, a fragile, fractured self that simply cannot survive the weight of guilt, remorse, or accountability. Here's what makes this psychological pattern so deceiving. They look completely unfazed. They go quiet. They stop responding. They show up online smiling, posting stories, acting as if nothing ever happened. And the performance, it's cold, it's polished, it's calculated. But don't mistake it for confidence. This is not strength. This is emotional camouflage. It's self-protection in disguise, wrapped in silence. The stoic illusion of power they project is not calm. It's not grace under pressure. It's suppression. It's fear, dressed up as indifference. They don't want you to know that your pain reaches them. They can't afford for you to see the cracks in the masks, because once that mask slips, Everything they've worked to hide could unravel. And that's the paradox. While they appear composed and detached on the outside, inside they're scrambling, but not to repair what's been broken. No, their focus isn't on healing, it's on preserving the illusion. They're not just ignoring you, they're reinforcing the script. I'm untouchable. I control how this ends. But let's be honest, this isn't mastery of emotions. It's avoidance of emotion. A truly stoic person, whether man or woman, faces discomfort with honesty. They confront hard truths, take responsibility, and grow. A narcissist, they run from pain. They silence not just you but also themselves. They're not afraid of pain because they're weak in a traditional sense. They're afraid because their entire identity is constructed on one fragile foundation: denial. Why do they deny? Because they don't want you to see it, the one thing they're trying hardest to conceal. Guilt, yes. The narcissist does feel something after hurting you, but it's not remorse, it's shame. And shame is very different from guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, there's something wrong with me, and I must hide it. And for someone with narcissistic tendencies, shame is unbearable. Why? Because their survival depends on believing they are above judgment, above criticism, above being flawed. That's why, the moment they cause harm, they don't move toward you to make amends. They retreat. Silence becomes their shield. If they don't speak of it, maybe it didn't happen. If they ghost you, maybe they can rewrite the story. In their revised version, they become the victim, and you become the unstable one, but they need you to doubt your own truth. Because as long as you hold on to it, their carefully crafted mask begins to crack. And that's a threat they cannot psychologically tolerate. Now here's where it gets especially dangerous, especially for people who are highly empathetic or emotionally intelligent. People who naturally look for the good in others. People who want to heal, to understand, to make things right. You start overthinking. Did I cause this? Did I push too hard? If I say the right thing, maybe they'll come around. But here's the painful truth. Clarity doesn't come from chasing someone who's hiding from themselves. And this is what the narcissist secretly wants. They want you stuck in that mental loop. Because as long as you're reacting to their silence, you're still playing their game. And your reaction, that's their validation. They may not speak a word, but they're watching. Watching to see if you're still hurting, still checking, still waiting, still craving closure. And every time you reach out, every time you break your boundary to get a response, they win. Because it proves something terrifying. They still matter more than your peace. It's time to step out of the narrative. Here's the hard stoic truth. You cannot rip the mask off someone who glued it on as a survival mechanism. But you can choose not to believe the performance anymore. You don't need to expose them. You only need to see clearly and act accordingly. Their silence is not power, it's fear. Their confidence is not real, it's protection, and their vanishing act. That's not the end of your story, it's the beginning. The chapter where you stop chasing validation from someone who used silence as a weapon. Because silence, when chosen with clarity, can be sacred. In Stoic philosophy, silence is sacred. It's a discipline, a powerful form of self-control that helps you observe, stay grounded, and protect your inner peace. But the silence of a narcissist, it's not sacred, it's strategic. You might think they've moved on, that they've found peace, that their silence is a sign of emotional stillness and growth. But what if I told you it's not stillness at all? It's pressure, it's power, It's a psychological chokehold, disguised as emotional detachment. And if you don't recognize it for what it truly is, you'll end up spending weeks, sometimes even months, feeling like you're suffocating inside someone else's silence. You'll start questioning yourself, wondering, am I healing? Or slowly being broken down by this emotional emptiness. Because in the hands of a narcissist, silence is not space, it's not grace, it's manipulation. Let's be honest, when someone truly wants peace, they communicate. Even if they need space, they offer clarity. They speak with integrity, not disappearance. But a narcissist, they wield silence like a scalpel, not to heal, but to cut away your self-worth, one small slice at a time. Why? Because they know something about human nature. The mind hates blanks. And when they stop speaking, your mind starts filling in the gaps. You begin to wonder, did I say too much? Was I too emotional? Are they happier without me? Am I being punished? That's exactly what they want, for your inner world to collapse under the weight of uncertainty. Their silence says, you're not worth an explanation. I control the story. You'll speak, I won't. It's not about peace, it's about power. This is their favorite form of control. Non-response. Words can be challenged, debated, defended, but silence is immune. That's what makes it so devastating. Because when someone refuses to respond, no matter how much you've explained, shared, or even apologized, they leave you stranded, alone with your own thoughts. And here's what usually happens. Most people, especially those who care deeply, begin to turn those thoughts inward. You stop blaming them. You start blaming yourself. That's the hidden genius of narcissistic silence. They don't have to say anything. You do the emotional labor for them, and tragically, it works. Because emotional intelligence isn't just about reading others, it's about managing yourself when others refuse to communicate. But most people aren't trained for that. So what do? They spiral, they overthink, they beg, they break their own boundaries, trying to reconnect with someone who never intended to repair. And all the while, the narcissist sits back, watches and feels validated. So what's the Stoic response? Detachment with dignity. This is where Stoicism becomes your emotional armor. The ancient Stoics understood that silence, when misused, was a trap for the untrained mind. So they trained themselves to sit with uncertainty, to master their internal response, to stay anchored in clarity. Here's the truth. You don't need a response from someone to validate your reality. You don't need their apology to restore your self-worth. You don't need to decode silence that was designed to confuse you. What you need is clarity. And clarity begins the moment you ask yourself, what is my peace truly worth? Let their silence echo back into the void they came from. You fill that void with purpose. Practice the spiritual discipline of not responding to provocation. That's not weakness, that's power, because yes, their silence hurts. But it doesn't have to control you. Let's be honest. It hurts when someone you loved becomes cold, distant and unrecognizable. It hurts when your vulnerability is met with nothing but silence. It hurts when the person who caused the damage refuses to even acknowledge it. But pain only becomes suffering when you interpret their silence as a statement about your worth. And it's not. Their silence is not a reflection of your worth. It's a mirror of their emotional limitation. They didn't go silent because you were wrong. They went silent because you saw too much. You confronted their false self. You pushed past the charm and into the cracks. You triggered the guilt they've spent a lifetime burying, and worst of all for them, you didn't collapse like they expected. So what did they do? They went quiet, but not out of strength, not out of clarity, out of control. Their silence isn't stillness. It's pressure away to dominate without speaking. It's a desperate strategy, a psychological tactic designed to keep you off balance. But here's what you must remember. You don't have to play the game. Let them sit in that silence. Let them cling to it like it's power. You don't need to win the silence match. You don't even need to respond. You just need to walk away from it. This is not a psychological arm wrestling contest. You're not here to prove your pain. You're not here to make them understand. You're here to reclaim your energy, to protect your mental peace, to refuse to let someone else's dysfunction shape your emotional state. That's what Stoicism teaches, not apathy, but awareness. Not detachment from life, but detachment from manipulation. So let them keep the silence. Let them treat it like a trophy it's all they've got. You, on the other hand, have something more powerful. You have truth. You have clarity. You have the strength to rebuild without needing an apology from the one who broke you. That's real peace. And it doesn't come from their silence. It comes from your decision to stop listening to it. Here's one of the most overlooked truths in the aftermath of narcissistic harm. They don't just leave the relationship. They leave with a rewritten script. Because, for a narcissist, image is everything. Not truth, not growth, not fairness, just image. How they're perceived, how they'll be remembered. So when they know they've caused pain, when they know, deep down, that they hurt someone who cared, they don't take responsibility. They do what they've always done best. They rewrite the story. Suddenly, they become the misunderstood one, the victim, the person who tried but was pushed too far, the one who had no choice but to walk away. And you become the unstable one, the dramatic one, the one who made things too difficult. They don't just lie to others, they lie to themselves. Because real accountability would shatter the fragile identity they've spent their lives protecting. The narcissist cannot let you have the last word. Why? Because the last word carries truth, and truth is poison to their carefully crafted persona. If you tell the truth that they gaslighted you, disrespected your boundaries, and walked away without explanation, that threatens what they value most, how they're seen. So instead of healing, instead of reflecting, they do what's easiest. They become the hero of their own fiction. In that version, you're the villain, or, at best, the emotional one who couldn't let go. That's why mutual friends may start to distance themselves. That's why you might see subtle posts on their social media hints that they were mistreated, or finally finding peace. And yes, you'll feel the urge to speak up, to correct the story, to defend yourself. But this is where Stoicism reminds you, truth does not beg to be believed. Let them wear their false narrative like armor, because that's all it is, emotional armor. Why do narcissists do this? Because the raw, honest version of reality is incompatible with their self-image. They cannot sit with discomfort. They cannot say, I hurt someone who genuinely cared about me. So they rewrite the story until they feel clean again. They project the shame they refuse to carry. They offload the blame onto you and then distance themselves. Not just physically, but morally. They create emotional distance by creating a new narrative. And to them, it's not manipulation, it's self-preservation. They don't see it as lying. They see it as restoring balances. Long as they remain the good one, even if it means turning you into the irrational, over-attached, or dramatic one. And why do you feel the urge to defend yourself? Because you're still grounded in truth. And when someone distorts the truth about you, especially someone you were loyal to, it stings deeper than words can describe. It burns when you know you showed compassion. It hurts when you remember how many chances you gave them, chances they never earned. This isn't just about public image. This is about integrity. You're not looking for revenge. You're craving fairness. But here's the stoic truth. Trying to convince someone who's already invested in a lie is a waste of your time, your energy, and your virtue. And your energy, it's sacred. If you pour it into people who survive on fiction, you'll end up starving your own peace. So how does a Stoic respond? You don't respond to lies with more noise. You respond with quiet clarity. Let them talk. Let them post. Let them perform for their audience. You don't have to disprove their fantasy. You only need to live your truth so boldly, so clearly, that their fiction crumbles under its own weight. And believe this. The people who are truly meant for youth, those with emotional depth and integrity, will feel the difference. Because real ones recognize emotional maturity. They feel alignment. They notice who walks in truth and who hides behind carefully edited illusions. Let the narcissist keep their story. It's the only thing they have left. But you have your peace. And peace, it never needs to be loud. So what happens when you stop playing their game? They start to panic. Because they're used to you reacting. They expect your emotional responses, your long explanations, your apologetic texts at 2 a.m. They're used to controlling the narrative by baiting you into the same exhausting loop. But when you finally go silent, not from pain, but from wisdom, it confuses them. They feel exposed. Not because you outed them, but because you've stopped participating in their illusion. That's when you reclaim your power, not by fighting their lies, but by refusing to be affected by them. This is what spiritual discipline looks like. This is what high-performance self-worth sounds like in action. Closing thought for this chapter. Yes, a narcissist will rewrite the story to stay the good one. Let them. You don't need to be seen as perfect. You only need to be at peace with the truth. And that peace, it's far more powerful than any version of reality they try to sell. People often ask, do narcissists feel guilt after hurting someone? The answer is, yes, but not in the way you hope. And certainly not in a way that leads to healing. You see, a narcissist does feel a kind of guilt, a sharp, quick sting of discomfort that strikes when their actions come too close to exposing the truth. But unlike emotionally healthy people, who allow guilt to guide them back to reflection, humility, and accountability, narcissists weaponize it. They don't process guilt, they project it. And before long, you find yourself in a strange, confusing loop where you've become the one being blamed. This is the narcissistic guilt to distortion cycle. For most people, guilt is a signal. It says, you crossed a line. Make it right. But for a narcissist, guilt is intolerable. Why? Because guilt means admitting imperfection. It challenges their ego. It forces them to face the parts of themselves they've spent years, maybe decades, avoiding. So what do they do instead? They transmute guilt into blame. Suddenly, they didn't betray you, you made them do it. You were too sensitive. You pushed them away. You were never satisfied. This isn't reasoning. It's emotional projection, defense mechanism that tosses guilt outward to avoid taking responsibility within. And this is where many people get trapped, especially those with emotional intelligence. Because they feel the weight, they seek answers, and they try to fix what they didn't break. If you're emotionally intelligent, this tactic cuts even deeper. Why? Because you're naturally introspective. You reflect, you analyze, you ask yourself the hard questions. You're willing to look at your own role, your words, your mistakes, and that's what makes you vulnerable to their manipulation. But here's the stoic truth. Trying to convince someone who's already invested in a lie is a waste of your time, your energy, and your virtue. And your energy, it's sacred. If you pour it into people who survive on fiction, you'll end up starving your own peace. So how does a Stoic respond? You don't respond to lies with more noise. You respond with quiet clarity. Let them talk, let them post, let them perform for their audience. You don't have to disprove their fantasy. You only need to live your truth so boldly, so clearly, that their fiction crumbles under its own weight. And believe this, the people who are truly meant for youth, those with emotional depth and integrity, will feel the difference. Because real ones recognize emotional maturity. They feel alignment. They notice who walks in truth and who hides behind carefully edited illusions. Let the narcissist keep their story. It's the only thing they have left. But you have your peace. And peace, it never needs to be loud. So what happens when you stop playing their game? They start to panic, because they're used to you reacting. They expect your emotional responses, your long explanations, your apologetic texts at 2 a.m. They're used to controlling the narrative by baiting you into the same exhausting loop. But when you finally go silent, not from pain, but from wisdom, it confuses them. They feel exposed, not because you outed them, but because you've stopped participating in their illusion. That's when you reclaim your power, not by fighting their lies, but by refusing to be affected by them. This is what spiritual discipline looks like. This is what high-performance self-worth sounds like in action. Closing thought for this chapter. Yes, a narcissist will rewrite the story to stay the good one. Let them. You don't need to be seen as perfect. You only need to be at peace with the truth. And that peace, it's far more powerful than any version of reality they try to sell. People often ask, do narcissists feel guilt after hurting someone? The answer is yes, but not in the way you hope. And certainly not in a way that leads to healing. You see, a narcissist does feel a kind of guilt, a sharp, quick sting of discomfort that strikes when their actions come too close to exposing the truth. But unlike emotionally healthy people, who allow guilt to guide them back to reflection, humility, and accountability, narcissists weaponize it. They don't process guilt, they project it. And before long, you find yourself in a strange, confusing loop where you've become the one being blamed. This is the narcissistic guilt-to-distortion cycle. For most people, guilt is a signal. It says, you crossed a line. Make it right. But for a narcissist, guilt is intolerable. Why? Because guilt means admitting imperfection. It challenges their ego. It forces them to face the parts of themselves they've spent years, maybe decades, avoiding. So what do they do instead? They transmute guilt into blame. Suddenly, they didn't betray you, you made them do it. You were too sensitive. You pushed them away. You were never satisfied. This isn't reasoning. It's emotional projection, defense mechanism that tosses guilt outward to avoid taking responsibility within. And this is where many people get trapped, especially those with emotional intelligence. Because they feel the weight, they seek answers, and they try to fix what they didn't break. If you're emotionally intelligent, this tactic cuts even deeper. Why? Because you're naturally introspective. You reflect, you analyze, you ask yourself the hard questions. You're willing to look at your own role, your words, your mistakes, and that's what makes you vulnerable to their manipulation. In a world where silence is often used as a tool of manipulation, clarity becomes your freedom. If someone truly wants to heal, they speak with honesty. But if they want control, they hide in the shadows, watching but never confronting. And you don't have to follow them into the dark. You can and should walk forward in the light of your truth, your healing, and your self-respect. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you react emotionally. Don't allow them to maintain significance in your story just by staying silent. Let them witness your glow from a distance, but never again let their silence shape your story. Here's a bitter truth most people miss. You didn't hurt the narcissist. You exposed them, and that's what broke them. You didn't insult them. You didn't fight them. You didn't betray them. All you did was stand in your truth, and in doing so, reflected the parts of themselves they've spent a lifetime avoiding. That's when everything changes. Their kindness curdles, their interest fades, their admiration turns into resentment. Because your growth, your clarity, your boundaries became a mirror. And in that mirror, they didn't see love, they saw their own shadow. They don't hate you, they hate what they see in themselves. You may wonder, why did they turn on me? I was kind, I was patient, I forgave so much. But narcissists don't respond to kindness the way healthy people do. Your emotional intelligence becomes a threat. Your ability to reflect, evolve, and grow only highlights all the things they've refused to face. So they resent you not because you hurt them, but because you made it impossible for them to keep pretending. Their coldness, their withdrawal, their venom, it's all a reaction to being exposed. You didn't try to unmask them. Your presence simply became the mirror, and that terrified them. When a narcissist even briefly sees their flaws, they panic not always outwardly, but internally it's chaos. The ego begins to crack, and instead of facing that fracture, they react, they project, they say you're controlling because they can't control themselves. They call you manipulative because they're projecting their own tactics. They label you fake because they know how much of their own self is a performance. This isn't analysis. This is survival. Psychological projection becomes their armor. If they can label you as the problem, they can avoid the war inside you. Didn't trigger their pain. You revealed it. Your presence made them feel seen to seen. And for someone who's built an identity around avoidance, being seen is terrifying. They didn't just ghost you. They ghosted the part of themselves they saw reflected in youth, the insecure part, the dishonest part, the hurtful part they never wanted to acknowledge. And instead of owning it, they cut you off or tried to tear you down. That's why the more grounded you became, the more unstable they seemed. Your peace felt like judgment. Your self-control felt like provocation. Your silence became a mirror they couldn't look away from. You became the standard they couldn't meet. And not because you asked too much, but because they gave too little. And deep down, they know it. But instead of rising to meet that standard, they label it as toxic, unreasonable, or cold. After all the pain and silence, the hardest part isn't facing the myths, keeping your mind from losing the peace you worked so hard to build. Because the truth is, you are not obligated to hold up the mirror forever, just so someone else can see themselves. You're not here to hold the mirror for them endlessly. That was never your job. You showed them the truth once and that was enough. Let them walk away. Let them blame. Let them hide. But never, ever shrink yourself just to make them feel comfortable in the illusion they've created. Stoicism teaches us, if you harm yourself to protect another person's illusion, you both suffer and no one wakes up. Your presence was a gift. Your clarity was the mirror. Your silence was the light. They may choose to reject it, but the mirror remains. And eventually, life through other people, through consequences, through loss will reflect back what you once tried to show them with love. You are not responsible for fixing their reflection. That is their work, their responsibility, their mountain to climb. And you've done enough now. Your task is to protect your emotional boundaries, to move forward without explanation, to love without needing to be understood, to walk in peace even when misunderstood. You are not their enemy, you are their awakening. But whether they awaken or not is no longer up to you. They left you, they blocked you, they replaced you, at least tried to. They acted cold, distant, as if nothing ever happened. But let's be honest, people don't stay silent forever if they truly feel nothing. If they really didn't care, they wouldn't still be quietly watching your page. They wouldn't post passive-aggressive quotes. They wouldn't keep trying to get your attention in indirect ways. So what's really going on? They regret it. They miss your energy. They miss being heard, being understood, feeling safe even if they pretended not to care. But here's the truth. They will never admit it. Not out loud, not to you, maybe not even to themselves. Regret doesn't always come with an apology. When ego is larger than integrity, you'll never hear, "I was wrong. I hurt you. I should have appreciated you more." Instead, regret shows up in vague and toxic ways, circling back with excuses, not accountability. Posting things to get your attention, but never speaking to you directly. Downplaying what happened, while still obsessing over it in private. Their silence isn't peace, it's psychological resistance. A refusal to confront the one thing that terrifies them most. That they lost someone real. Why can't they admit it? Because admitting regret takes humility, emotional maturity, and self-awareness, things narcissists and emotionally avoidant people often lack or refuse to develop. If they admit regret, they have to admit you mattered, that their actions cost them something valuable, and to them, that feels like defeat. So instead, they pretend you're replaceable. They pretend the breakup was mutual. They pretend they're fine. But when no one is left to impress, the truth gets loud. Unspoken regret is still regret. Just because they don't admit it doesn't mean they don't feel it. Sometimes regret sounds like a song they keep playing, looks like a profile they keep checking, feels like an ex they can't stop bringing up. But more often, regret is buried, swallowed by pride, diluted by distraction, locked behind defense mechanisms. Don't be fooled. That cold front, it's just a cover for guilt. That silence, it's not strength, it's suppression. That indifference, it's fear, the fear of facing both you and their own conscience. Your absence taught them something your presence never could. You were the one who listened, who forgave, who stayed calm in the chaos, who offered peace when they brought only destruction. They're starting to feel what you once felt, the confusion, the emptiness, the heavy weight of words left unsaid. But they'll never show it. Why? Because to show it means to admit they once felt something real. And people who base their identity on control can't afford to admit they lost control. especially not over their own emotions. But here's your reminder: you don't need their confession to heal. You might still wonder, do they think about me? Will they ever reach out? Do they regret it? And the truth, probably yes. But what truly matters now is this: you don't need their apology. You don't need closure in their language. You don't need their regret to validate your worth. Their silence, that's their prison. Your peace, that's your escape. Let them carry the weight of what they never had the courage to say. You carry freedom, dignity, and emotional clarity. Regret that is never admitted is a lesson never learned. If they never own up to what happened, they'll never change. And if they never change, they'll never be able to meet you at the level you've grown to. So let them go. Your life no longer revolves around those who failed to value you. Your life expands with the people who do, starting with yourself. Don't wait for regret to become words. Let their silence echo into the distance. You don't need to be part of their awakening. You already were, even if they never thanked you. People often say silence is powerful, and that's true when it comes from a place of peace, wisdom, and self-mastery. But when silence is used to punish, confuse, or manipulate, that's not power, that's fear, that's cowardice in disguise. Let's call it what it is. When silence becomes a weapon rather than wisdom, it's no longer noble. The narcissist didn't go silent to protect peace. They went silent to maintain control. Their silence is not a mindful pause. It's a calculated move designed to trigger your anxiety, make you second-guess yourself, and have you ask, did I do something wrong? They don't respond because they know your mind will fill in the blanks. And once you're stuck in uncertainty, they control the narrative without saying a single word. That's not stoicism. That's emotional manipulation disguised as spiritual detachment. True strength confronts. Cowardice evades. Strength looks like this: having difficult conversations, owning your impact, sitting in discomfort, being honest even when it's messy. Silence. Silence is easy. It takes no courage to disappear, no growth to block someone, no maturity to dodge responsibility. In fact, silence can be the most passive-aggressive form of control, and they know it. Why do they stay silent? Not because they're enlightened, but because their ego tells them it's safer that way. They'll pretend they're protecting their peace, but in reality, they're avoiding the consequences of their actions. They're silently hoping you break first. They maintain a false image of being unbothered. But that's not peace. That's performance. Because to acknowledge the pain they caused, to admit they hurt someone who genuinely cared, would destroy the carefully curated mask they wear. And that truth shatters the version of themselves they've worked so hard to protect. Now, your silence. That's different. Your silence is sacred. Here's the difference. Their silence manipulates. Yours heals. They go quiet to avoid. You go quiet to grow. They run from guilt. You rise from clarity. They withhold to create confusion. You release to create peace. You withdrew to create boundaries, not because you're weak, but because you've grown wiser. Don't let anyone make you question your emotional intelligence. You're not cold for refusing to engage. You're not bitter for walking away without a fight. You're practicing spiritual discipline, the stoic art of non-reaction grounded in truth, not ego. The game ends the moment you stop playing. Remember this: the silent treatment only works when you chase the noise, when you beg for clarity, when you try to decode their mixed signals, when you break your own boundaries just to restore the connection. But once you step away from that game, their silence loses its grip. You no longer wait, you no longer explain, you no longer perform. Emotional labor for someone who won't even show up as an adult. And in that moment, you win. Not because you beat them, but because you freed yourself from the emotional prison they tried to keep you in. Let their silence echo behind you, while you walk forward in peace. In Stoic terms, their silence is pathos, a symptom of their inner chaos, not a reflection of your worth. Let them remain there, trapped in a cycle of avoidance and ego defense. But you rise. You don't need closure from someone who hides behind silence. You are the closure. You are the peace. You are the proof that walking away with dignity is louder than any argument ever could be. And that is the final lesson. Their silence isn't strength, it's a mask, and you no longer need to stare at it hoping it speaks. You've outgrown the need for validation. You've reclaimed your power, and now your silence is no longer a reaction, it's your liberation. If you've come this far, it's not by accident. You've been hurt, you've questioned yourself, you've wondered how someone could cause such pain and walk away as if it meant nothing. But now you understand, their silence wasn't peace. Their coldness wasn't clarity, their distance wasn't healing. It was avoidance, guilt, cloaked in ego, regret they'll never admit. And you've grown past needing an apology, past the explanations, past the illusion. You no longer wait for their words to set you free, because you became the freedom. And that's what Stoicism teaches us, not just how to endure, but how to rise, quietly, powerfully, without apology. So if this message reached you at the right moment, don't just listen, live it. Let go of those who never took responsibility. Stop trying to heal the ones who found comfort in hurting you. Reclaim your emotional intelligence, your self-worth, and your inner calm. Let your silence be your closure. Let your boundaries be your response. Let your life come focused, grounded, be the loudest answer they never expected. If this video touched something deep within you, don't leave quietly. Drop a comment. I choose peace over power games. Subscribe to Life Through Stoicism to rebuild your life from logic, not emotion. And share this with someone who needs to hear what you once needed to hear. Your story isn't over. This chapter wasn't the ending. It was your awakening. Now walk forward with clarity, with calm, with command.